Hey, hi, how's it going? So, it's currently been over 6 months now since the Switch 2 came out, and I thought maybe I would make a video talking about whether or not the Switch 2 is worth it. Alright, let's not waste any more time and get right to it. Have fun listening to me talk about the most controversial console in all of existence, the Nintendo Switch 2. How about we start off with something simple, like some last-gen game improvements. After all, it is pretty much the reason we all asked for a new Switch in the first place. So remember that game you bought 3 years ago that runs slower than your old man before his morning coffee? Well, you can buy it a cup now, all for the low price of 10 to 20 bucks a cup.
Huh?
Wait a minute. Okay, well, surely they gotta be adding some really substantial stuff to make it worth paying for, right?
In The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, you can freely create your own vehicles and weapons. But have you ever wanted to share your creations?
No.
You can edit photos taken in-game.
No shit! I can already do that with my thumbnail editor.
Once per day, you can spin for a daily bonus.
That wasn't a redundant sentence at all. So they add the most random quality of life features into this stupid shit that, let's be real, are really just things that should have been there in the game since day one with the Switch 1 version, and then they expect me to still pay 10?
Or access the upgrade packs at no additional cost with a paid Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pack membership.
But of course, it's only for the 2 Zelda games. So my question is, what good reason is there for the expansion pack to not include all the Nintendo Switch 2 upgrades? You still have to pay for Kirby, Mario Party, Mario Wonder, Animal Crossing, and all the other future bullshit updates that they're gonna do. Now, before I get too carried away here, I should mention that on day 1 when the Switch 2 came out, certain games did in fact get free updates, but with no new content. For the sake of this video, I decided to test out some of these free updates myself, just to see how drastic they were. Now I'm going to do my best to verbally explain, but keep in mind my capture card sucks ass, as does my video editing software, so I wasn't able to capture footage myself. This is just some random footage from the internet so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Starting with Mario Odyssey, and this seems to be the one that even Nintendo themselves seem to advertise quite a bit. It now runs in 4K 60 FPS, whereas before on the Switch 1, it was rather blurry at 900p. Again, this doesn't have any new content or anything, but it does actually look pretty good resolution-wise now. I would even dare to say the change is pretty drastic. It also has some simple performance cleanups, even though the frame rate wasn't that bad in the original, but areas like New Donk City and the Luncheon Kingdom, which would occasionally dip frames just because of their size, run perfectly stable now on the Switch 2. And the NPCs in the background, if they're far away enough, now run at 60 FPS when they used to be 30. Not a huge deal, mind you, but a good way to show just how much more processing memory or whatever the fuck the Switch 2 has compared to the Switch 1. The game runs with absolutely no trouble now. I decided to test a few other games that had frame rate issues and couldn't maintain a stable 60 FPS, such as Mario RPG, Bowser's Fury, and Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, which is a remaster of a Wii game that somehow ran worse than the Wii game did, which was fucking embarrassing. And sure enough, all of them run perfectly fine now, thank God. Now, of course, before getting the Switch 2, I didn't know exactly how well they would run, and I saw the patch notes for Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, and I realized that they acknowledged everything except the frame rate. No! Now, Echoes of Wisdom is one of the worst performing games I've ever played, period. And the reason for that is simple. Not only is the frame rate inconsistent, but some stupid degenerate fuckface decided that it would be a good idea to code the game to make it so that it would drop all the way down to a locked 30 FPS instead of just drop a few frames lower if the frame rate couldn't maintain a stable 60. It is a technical nightmare. Play it on the Switch 2 now though? Oh hey, the game's actually playable now. The resolution improvements I would overall say are kind of a mixed bag. There are quite a lot that do have some good noticeable graphical differences where things pop more and the lighting is more colorful and more shading and all that. But then there are other games that they enhanced, particularly old Wii U games that are just like, oh, I think they added about 3 pixels. Which I'm kind of surprised they enhanced the Wii U games at all, because they were already technically enhanced with the ports on the Switch 1, and the Wii U was already an HD system with some very simple, texture work, so it's obvious that an enhancement like this wouldn't really make that big of a difference, and sure enough it doesn't. Now Wii games on the other hand, they recently just released Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, it does actually seem to be nicely enhanced because the stupid resolution on the Wii was obviously so goddamn low. Also, they added a bunch of remastered textures, which helps a great deal, since obviously they couldn't do that on the actual ports like the Wii U games. And then, of course, there are the paid updates, which I already just briefly touched on before this. And those, like, unlock the frame rate from 30 to 60. They obviously have some other stuff in there that makes it quote-unquote worth paying for, although I don't think so at all. But regardless, they do look and run good. So overall, the Switch 1 enhancements are pretty good, I would say, overall on the Switch 2, outside of the fact that some of them you have to pay for. Thanks for nothing, Nintendo.
I like money.
At worst, they're just a small little improvement that's a nice quality of life. And at best, the games thankfully finally run the way that they're supposed to now after all these years. Man, that sounded a whole lot less depressing in my head. So one random morning, Nintendo finally decided to announce the Switch 2 after years of contemplating how they would announce it in the first place and being like, what do the kids like these days? Oh, that's right, ASMR. Let's make a video like that. And so then we got this really weird video of the Switch 2 getting announced that's more awkward to sit through than your dad walking in on you watching Lowly. When Nintendo announced at the end of the video that it was called Switch 2 and that it would be backwards compatible with Switch 1 games, everybody was just like, and waited to hear actual information. So about 100 days after that initial reveal, Jesus Christ, they sure do keep us hanging, don't they? We finally get the first Nintendo Direct for the Switch 2, and one of the segments within that Direct specifies all the different features and the overall build quality of the Switch 2 and a bunch of other bullshit, such as the Switch 2 has a much beefier and larger screen at around 8 inches now. The fact that it has HDR support, which by the way, this HDR is just fucking obnoxious to calibrate. I spent, by probably no exaggeration, an entire week or two when I first got my Switch 2 just trying to configure this stupid HDR right here. I had to not only adjust the HDR correctly, but I also had to crank up the contrast of my TV and sharpness a little bit as well as a bunch of other little features on my TV to make it look as good as it does now. Needless to say, it looks fantastic now, but at the cost of what? No casual is going to want to dick around with this forever, and I imagine most people are going to want to turn the HDR off instead. Which, when right out of the box it looks like this, I can't say I really blame anybody for doing that at that point. Because the only other way in order to calibrate the HDR properly is to look up a YouTube video tutorial, which you shouldn't have to do. And these videos are full of a bunch of complex nerd shit that even I can't understand. You basically have to readjust your entire TV and your entire HDR settings on the system like I did, just to get it to look decent. Nintendo really should have just come up with a solution for that, because I think a lot of people are just going to be really confused when they pop their system in the dock and it turns out to look like shit.
Why doesn't mine look like that?
And then we got some updates on the Joy-Cons themselves, including the new control sticks, which hopefully don't have drift, right? Right?
The left and right sticks are now larger.
What, that's it? Yeah, they didn't fix shit with these controllers. But hey, now you can use them both as a mouse. Yes, this is a cool idea, and the functionality of it works great. But I honestly don't know in the long term how many games will actually use mouse controls, and my fear is it'll end up being kinda like the camera on the Joy-Con 1 controllers, where it only is used for about 2 games. But hey, it's only a matter of time before Mario Maker 3 is all but confirmed, I suppose, since that would be a perfect game to use mouse controls for drawing the levels. And there are a whole bunch of other minor features that are not really worth going into, at least when it comes to the hardware build itself. The final feature that I guess is noteworthy is the Game Chat feature, which Nintendo seems to be advertising a lot. With this feature, you can finally talk to your friends, like you should have been able to, on your Switch 2 while you all play a game together. Now, since I don't have any friends, I can't really give my opinion on this since I can't really test it out. Although from what I've seen, it seems to be a complete piece of shit if you really want to get invested in what your friends are actually doing on their screens. It does have some options like screen sharing and blowing up your friend's screen. Not that kind of blow up. So then you can watch a stream of their game running at 572p at 8.5 frames per second. Again, I can't really give my opinion on that, but that doesn't sound like a good time to me. Thank God I don't have friends now. So overall, yeah, the Switch 2 features are kind of a mixed bag. I don't really see it as anything to write home about, especially when the HDR is so weirdly calibrated. But hey, once you finally get that to work, then it's a very comfortable experience for the most part when you're playing on your TV. Oh. Huh, that was weird. My video just went black for a split second there. As I was saying, when you're playing in TV mode with the HDR on, at least it... Why does it keep doing that? Okay, there is one big issue that I want to address here, and I don't know if anybody else has been having this problem, but I thought I'd throw it in here at the very end. So apparently there seems to be some system stability issue where if you play on the TV, occasionally the Switch 2 will go black for about 2 or 3 seconds. And I'm not entirely sure what's causing this. I've tried it on multiple docks, so it's not an HDMI connection issue, and it still happens. Hopefully they'll fix it. I tried playing around in the settings a little bit, and I turned off the calibrate to TV button or whatever the fuck it's called, and I haven't had the issue since, which has only been about a week or so since I did that. So hopefully Nintendo addresses that soon, although given how bad their communication is, I highly doubt. But yeah, very, very disappointing indeed.
You had one job. Just the one.
Alright, how about we move on to the next segment now that we know that the actual system itself is garbage. Maybe the games make up for it a bit, I don't know. So unlike Sony and Microsoft, Nintendo is very famous for having games. And if you don't know what a game is, it's basically a playable form of entertainment. Nintendo had quite a few games in that Switch 2 Direct that I mentioned earlier, but the question is, are these games really any good? Now obviously I'm not going to review every single game for 15 minutes each because then this video would turn out to be longer than Jeff Keighley's Game Awards show. But I will touch on the highlights they had last year: Hyrule Warriors, Mario Kart World, Switch 2 Welcome Tour, Kirby Air Riders, Donkey Kong Bonanza, and Dragon Drive. First up is Mario Kart World, which is the first new Mario Kart game in 11 years. So obviously this game was very highly anticipated when it got revealed at the Direct. And then it finally came out, and, well...
I've got to say, in all honesty, it's the biggest piece of dog shit.
So in this Mario Kart game, they basically decided that it was a good idea to get rid of 3-lap tracks, you know, like you traditionally play a Mario Kart game for, when it comes to the online races, and instead replace all the content with a bunch of boring, bloated, empty world dog shit. And then after releasing this Forza clone, they decided, yeah, you know what, let's just charge $80 for this. And everybody was obviously like, well, why the hell is this game $80 if it has less content? And isn't even what I play Mario Kart for. And then fucking Howie Mandel has the balls to come out on the news and say,
we believe based on the depth and breadth of the play and the repeatability of the play over time, the pricing that we announced is the right pricing.
Jesus Christ, this kid's got to get his ego in check. It's his tone, right? I know.
Yeah, those online match error codes sure are showing off the replay value, aren't they? What a disaster. Next up is Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. I didn't buy this game. Next up is Donkey Kong Bonanza! So this game was made by the Mario Odyssey team, and boy oh boy does it show, because it is incredible. Much like that game, it has a big emphasis on collecting shit, and instead of Power Moons, you collect golden bananas called Bananium Gems. You also collect fossils and some other things as well to help power up Donkey Kong. Different outfits, for example, can change your stats, and there's a skill tree to help power up Donkey Kong as well, such as the destructive power of his hits, and how much health he has, and some new stuff as well, such as being able to turf surf on some water, or to transform into different animals using Pauline's singing. Yes, Pauline is also in this game, and she's a young teenager this time. I honestly thought she would be a little bit annoying, but thankfully she's not like that. She just tags along for the ride and is just silly and upbeat all the time. Gameplay wise, the game is pretty straightforward. You climb, you break shit. You turf surf, you break more shit. You fight a boss for 10 seconds, you break more shit. And then you find a little secret area and get yourself a... The next game on the list is Dragon Drive, a game that is actually both physically and figuratively a pain in the ass. I praised the Switch 2 mouse controls for the Joy-Cons, and that still remains true, but for whatever reason, it seems like they have different mouse sensitivities slightly. Because this stupid wheelchair basketball bullshit game really does a good job at emphasizing just how terrible those controls are, especially when paired with motion controls if you're doing something very complex and competitive like this. It had a demo some time ago ago that I tried, but I didn't actually end up buying this game. But what I played was really annoying, and the worst part of it is not even just the gameplay or the controls themselves, it's that it's an online-only game. Now, I realize that nobody plays with each other on the couch anymore like I do, but if you are somebody who is still stuck in the past and enjoys doing that kind of shit, then why on earth would you get this game if there's no local multiplayer whatsoever? Again, Nintendo seems to be showing me that it's a pretty good thing that I don't have friends right now. Moving on. Second to last game here is Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, which is easily the easiest game I've ever played in my life. You basically just mash Y, 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 and then X, and you do that over and over and over and over again until the enemy dies eventually. Sometimes you'll fight a little mini-boss like a giant boss Bokoblin or something like that, and the strategy is still going to be pretty much the same, however. What will happen is you'll eventually break the guy's meter and stagger him to the point where he falls to the ground, and you can deal some bonus damage to him. He's pretty much had no opportunity to attack you, however, though, so this feels incredibly broken. Once he gets back up, you can finish him off with a super dual move, whatever the fuck this is called, where you team up with another one of your allies, and then you basically shoot light out of your hands or some shit to kill the guy by redirecting the light right to him. But of course the big Bokoblin bitch is as fat as a barn, and it's completely impossible to miss him therefore. The characters I would say are still fun, but come on man, the characters are enjoyable, that's not what I play a fucking game for. I play a game to play the damn game. I have no desire to ever go back to this game, and I've already uninstalled it because it's like 40 gigabytes, Jesus fucking Christ. I'd save your $70 for an actual Zelda game rather than this dog shit.
It's being called the biggest fucking waste of your hard-earned money to come along in years.
Last and best is Kirby Air Riders, a sequel to a GameCube game that nobody except for me and 7 other people played and loved. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this game in terms of how it plays, mainly because 1, it's a sequel, and 2, Sakurai himself had 2 directs just dedicated to Kirby Air Riders alone. What I will mention is what the hell is different this time. So unlike the first Kirby Air Ride game, you get to pick your rider this time, instead of just having to stick with Kirby, hence why it's called Kirby Air Riders. Some of the other riders include characters like Knuckle Joe, Cappy, and my personal favorite, Rick the Hamster, or whatever he is. There are a bunch of new vehicles as well, of course, most of which are good for a certain type of minigame at the very end of the city trial mode, such as using the battle chariot in order to beat the shit out of everybody else in the battle style minigames, or the normal chariot and the wheelie scooter, which have very good handling and therefore are good for more precise minigames like the ones where you have to eat as much food as possible or push a certain number of switches. The rules for the minigame in City Trial work a lot differently than they did in the first game. In that game, the minigame would be random, but now, after you complete your build, it asks you to pick from a random pool of 4 for which one suits your build best. Which initially sounds a little cheap, but there are plenty of people who will have a very similar build as you, so you're always left looking at your opponents regardless, wondering,
is he about to kick my ass?
So just because you got a good build does not always mean you'll run away with the win. You know what it does always mean though? That the game will be fun to play, because let's be real, everything that this man puts out is fun to play. So yeah, overall the Switch 2 has a little bit of a mixed bag when it comes to the games, but the ones that are good are really, really good. Those being Donkey Kong Bonanza and Kirby Air Riders. Now the real question you might be asking yourself is a $450 console worth buying just for 2 games?
No.
You just can't go around killing people.
Why?
What do you mean why? 'Cause you can't.
Why?
Because you just can't, okay?
So I've already covered pretty much all the bases of the console itself, and so therefore this isn't so much a critique as it is who is this console for, and what has Nintendo done to its community by kind of dividing it between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. I guess you could say this is my glorified final verdict with some additional thoughts thrown in. Despite the high sales numbers the Switch 2 already has over just the past few months, not even a year, it does seem to have a lot of controversy online, and rightfully so. Plenty of people are still choosing to stick with their Switch 1 as well, given that there's 150 plus million units sold of that console, and only about 15 million or so of this one. Now obviously I'm not trying to be one of those grifters and say that the Switch 2 is a failure because of that. After all, it hasn't even been out for a year yet. But back to my point, if people are still so hesitant about getting this console months later, then what's really stopping them? I'm aware that there are certain things happening around the world that are causing prices to go up in general, and it seems like that's not going to slow down anytime soon. But honestly, I think the story is much bigger than just the current state of the economy, or even the anti-consumer practices behind the company that made the console for that matter. The first reason, I think, is simply the games, or lack thereof. As I just went over in that segment, there are really only about 2 games that are exclusive to the Switch 2 that are worth getting. And it seems like Nintendo's most anticipated game at the moment is just a Switch 1 game that doesn't even have a Switch 2 edition. People buy game consoles to play games after all. So it does make sense for those people to want to wait until more games come out before they buy the console. But there's a second component to this, and I think this reason is even bigger than just the lack of games. I can pretty much guess that you watching this video right now have seen YouTube comparison videos when it comes to graphics of certain games running on different hardware. People like to talk about hardware in the sense that it's a graphical or generational leap. But not to sound like an old fart here, because I'm not one, back in my day we didn't even need videos like this to show the graphical differences. I grew up in the early 7th gen of gaming, when gaming was transitioning from SD to HD. And we had HD editions, as they would call them today, of certain games that released on older hardware, specifically the Wii. And the difference was just absolute night and day. It wasn't just simply, oh, the new console made the game look sharper, or the game now runs at 60 FPS when it used to be 30. No, it was a complete reimagining practically. That same jump from HD to 4K now is really not that drastic. And as a result, it makes sense for people to not want to get a whole new console if it doesn't even really feel like that much of a new console rather than just a simple upgrade. And that's honestly how I would explain the Switch 2. It's a Nintendo Switch Pro. In order to take full advantage of everything that this system has to offer, which is not even that much, you have to have an expensive TV that can do 4K at 120Hz. This is true for every 9th gen console really, and the TV also has to ideally have a game mode that you can toggle on to prevent input latency that all these big 4K AI upscale TVs have. This mode also dimmens the image, meaning that you need HDR or some other kind of brightness setting just to be able to see the game comfortably on the TV after turning the mode on. If you're willing to play around with all that stuff for long enough, then you can get this thing to look pretty much as good as you want, but that's a very big if. I found that my Switch 1 looked very dim on my big 4K TV, so having this feature on the Switch 2 was obviously a very welcome addition. Not to mention all the performance updates to the games that we got, even if they are very minuscule. But even though I am appreciative of my Switch 2 and I do enjoy it, I can't help but recognize just how much this system was built in an echo chamber. With Nintendo relying so much on these Switch 2 edition games and all these new features, it's obvious that this is what's holding back new games, leaving the vast majority of the casual crowd left missing. If you're a new gamer who's entering this industry in the dark state that we're in right now, and you're part of the 90% of people who still have an HD TV in your living room, just buy a Switch 1. Because 4K HDR doesn't even look that good on those TVs. It just doesn't look like shit anymore. And at the end of the day, people buy video game consoles to play video games.